Well, today you have Douglas, Michael, and Tyler here, and we have a little lesson that we would like to go over. It's called Limited Hangouts and Controlled Opposition, and we have this divided into two parts. In this audio, you're going to learn what a limited hangout, controlled opposition are, and then we're going to, in the second video, give you a case study of a place where we think that a lot of the people that contribute to the site are not aware that it's a controlled opposition site. So then we're going to dissect this so that you can find out yourself when you've stumbled into these spin zones. And the reason that this is such an important topic for me right now, guys, is because people just keep sending me so many emails asking me about, are those military helicopters landing in LA and how they have made 5G safe and all of this. And I'm disappointed that people still believe this kind of disinformation. But then the other thing is, as a teacher, I go, well, we haven't done our job, Douglas. We haven't taught this well enough. So out the gate, what would you say?
Hope pornography. Some of it is out of good intention, and some of it is out of very, very bad intention. It is just, as you say, controlled opposition. So if you go back and you look at the history of this, here in America, instead of like in Britain where there is no free speech, we have free speech, but it's being curtailed. Michael and I were just saying, how many more minutes of free speech do we have left in America? Because everywhere you look, it's curtailed. But to begin with, they weren't doing that. They weren't going insane lawlessly like they are now. What they did before was they would do things like set up something that looked like it was for the people who are against corruption in the government. And they lead you on and they lead you on, and pretty soon they're selling you products and this and that, and they always get you 50% riled up, but then they don't tell you to do anything, and then you go, oh, wait, what's going on? Who funds these people? Or you get somebody on the other side. I can name names, but we're not going to today. But you know who I'm talking about. People who are paid by Hollywood to come and destroy anyone in the alternative media, any citizen journalist, by going in, giving them equipment support, and then destroying them from the inside out, oftentimes ending up in lawsuits. Plus, let's remember that right now, it isn't like it used to be. They used to have these cartoon versions up on the screen, or cartoon versions on the media, or in alternative media, and especially now with social media. Everyone can be a broadcaster. Everyone can have free speech and say whatever they want, until the hundreds of them, if not thousands, of conservative voices were wiped off the internet, demonetized, and now we see the attack against free speech. So what we're trying to say today is learn discernment. Figure out how to find your truth, because if you can't find truth, you're going to starve to death, okay? Truth is the only thing keeping you alive. And if you can't find it in this forest, you can't find the tree for the forest, because there's so much out there and you don't know who's real and who's not real. First off, listen to Betsy and her team and see the indications put up on Truth News headlines.
But only after we've been talking and writing for over 2 years, close to 3 years. So we hope that our history shows you who we are and what we're saying, and we are striving to find truth. And anytime that we target what we're striving for, we go back and try to correct it. And the first thing that I look for is who is funding the operation, because people have to pay their utility bills. They have to. If you have an apartment in New York, it costs a lot of money. You're not spending your whole day trolling and blogging and doing videos. Somebody is paying your bill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, this is an issue that I didn't spend 2 seconds thinking about a few years ago. I noticed that all the messages were quite confusing and frustrating. So what I just did mentally is that doesn't make sense, so I just moved on. It didn't bother me that I didn't know why it didn't make sense or what their ultimate motive was. I just ignored it and moved on, under the premise that truth will find a way, and that truth will find its natural niche, and will understand it, and it will be a calming influence, as opposed to all of these confusing, frustrating influences. So a few years ago, and partially thanks to you guys, I started really thinking about this, from an engineer's viewpoint. And I said, what is it we're observing? what are we looking at when we hear all these seemingly confused messages? And I thought of an analogy just this morning, where if we've got 30 messages out there, and they're all confusing, they're all over the place, well, that's probably on purpose. There's an intent to that. Somebody is intentionally keeping it confusing. And so the question is, what is their motive? And then how do we discern between the truth and the lies? And that's where I started in trying to figure this out. And I'm going to stop there because I'll give the conclusion as we move along here.
Well, so for me, my big red pill moment on what a spin zone was as a young adult. I'd come home and, after you get the kids in bed and the dinner fixed and all that stuff, it's 8 o'clock. And so I'm going to sit down and consume my hour of news, because most working people only have a limited amount of time. So then I would turn on Fox News, because I thought that was a place you could go to get truth news. Well, then I'd be stuck with an O'Reilly show, and I'm going to bring his name up because he's prominent. He's no longer on the air, and he told me that he was a no spin zone, and I would watch that, but I would always leave unfulfilled. I felt like I was being my truth nourishment I was really lacking in nourishment for that. He never seemed to really go all the way. He always stopped short. And then finally, one day, I came out of this stupor and this brainwashing, realizing that he had placed me in a spin zone for years, keeping me from that hour that I could have been using to really deep dive and research truth. So what they know, our enemy, this is fake news, the enemy, the propagandists out there, they know that you only have a certain amount of hours during a day to consume your information. And so what they do is they put these sites out there that are so outrageous. You spend your time on military helicopters landing in Los Angeles than you do on what's really important and truthful. And that's what these limited hangouts do. They waste your time and they keep you from going the next level. The other thing is, another way to spot them is when they have the same narrative over and over and over again. And they never move to the next level of resolving the very issue and problem that they rise in the first place.
And they have this, all of them have the same narrative at the same time.
Yes.
That's
yes.
Another telltale clue.
Right.
Well, when we were young, we turned on the boob tube, we turned on the TV, and it told us our opinion. It gave us our opinion, right? We weren't allowed an opinion. And they used perception management. And perception management developed by Tavistock and by Frankfurt School and by all the different, basically, cyber warfare or technological warfare against us, manipulation, brainwashing. That was from the get-go. There wasn't a moment that television was on that wasn't going on. And we believed them, because in perception management, there's usually 10, 12 steps. One of them is to come from an authoritative position. Another one is to keep you confused and tell different stories so that you don't know what's going on. And that's the one they're using in today's world, as you just mentioned, Michael. 30 different stories. All of them say they're true. You can't tell. They half of them or more are using anonymous sources, which are very authoritative anonymous sources, supposedly. And then they give you confused information, and they change it up later, but they don't print any retractions or ever retract anything. In our day, if what was his name, Huntley and Brinkley, or
Walter Cronkite,
if he spoke, it was the truth, and every American believed that with their heart and soul.
Right.
There was no way that anything could have possibly been on television that was a lie. That's the way we really lived our lives, and we believed everything on television was true, and we needed to be like it.
So, we didn't want to believe that there was something other than the pursuit of truth behind these different media figures. What we're now learning is that there was this New World Order agenda, this 200-year plan that was developed by Cecil Rhodes and Viscount Alfred Milner and the British War Cabinet, that they had a 200-year plan to basically install the New World Order in the world. And it's really, at one point, you just can't believe that. So they got very successful at labeling things that exposed them as conspiracy theory. And so consequently, anything that got close to them was labeled conspiracy theory, and then we were told that we should shove it off. And us being dutiful consumers of truth, we did what they told us.
Okay, so one of the most important things to watch out for is who's funding the operation. Because let me tell you, folks, selling supplements isn't going to support the kind of operations that you are seeing out there in YouTubeville. Some of these operations are pretty elaborate. Some are just very basic, but still you have to ask the question, who's paying these folks' utility bills? And what we found out now is that you've got trolls out there that are paid $15, $20 an hour by, the globalists. It always comes back to these globalist operations, these George Soros NGOs that are funding trolls to actually be there to do this work. This is an information war. The warfare is right there in front of you under the YouTube comments. So, Michael, talk to us about the funding. How does an average person find out how their favorite site is funded?
It depends on whether they're public or private. It's generally easier if they're a public company because they have certain reporting requirements that are registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission. So let's just assume they're public for a minute. You can go get their annual reports. They have certain requirements. Anytime there's what they call a material change in the operation of the organization, they have to report it. And that's a certain schedule of form that they have to file. And then they file quarterly reports, and then they file annual reports called the 10K. And then they have another one, a useful one called a Form 4, which is where the insiders, whenever they buy or sell stock, and these insiders would be all the officers, all of the directors, and then any third-party investor that's got more than 5% of the stock of that organization has to report as well. So those Form 4s are quite interesting and useful because they show exactly when people are buying and selling. And oftentimes, you can correlate those activities with other things that are going on out in the press and start to see when that activity is getting suspicious. So that's one thing, and that has been quite useful in the study that we're going to talk about tomorrow, to see that you don't have to have control of a corporation to have a lot of influence in the messages they put out. I'm talking media organizations. And kind of the rule of thumb is you can have a 5% holding in an organization and effectively run it, because that's a lot of influence on the organization. And so if all you got to do is maybe in a meeting use body language to say, I don't really like you talking about that subject. Well, if the CEO is needing cash and that person's providing cash, it's obvious that the person's going to listen to him.
Well, when you say that I think about Richard C. Bloom and his influence in Avid, ISIS management, in what you just described. How would that fit?
Well, I happen to know that one because we've looked at that. He has the largest outside holding at something over 10% of the organization. So in effect, that's a controlling interest. It's not 51%, but it's enough to have a heavy influence on the organization. So you can influence their priorities, what they're putting efforts in product-wise, message-wise. It just depends on how you wield it.
And for those of you who don't know who Richard C. Bloom is, he's the husband of Dianne Feinstein. And what is Avid ISIS Management?
What is it?
Yeah, well, some people may not know.
Well, it was Michael and his researchers who found through Lord Malloch Brown, I think it was our good friend James, who had pointed out that everybody's reading the same prompter from ISIS Management, which is the group that owns Avid. And Avid is a prompting system that takes probably what would be the basis of the Associated Press and Reuters Thompson, writes out the text that, a Dan Rather used to write out himself, a Walter Cronkite. They used to write it out. If you listen to the different stations, you'd hear a little different stuff.
They'd have the cue cards in front of the camera, and they'd read it off to the side.
And they wrote those words. None of these journalists, none of the people on screen now write anything. It's all read from a prompter, and if they have pages down in front of them, that's the same thing. And it's written by, we don't know exactly who, but we've speculated. But for sure, it's extreme leftist, extremely basically fascist, and is now it's propaganda, and it's not free speech. It's garbage speech. It's fake news, and it's owned. All the stations, over 95% of them, are owned by a group of 6 different corporations. And if you look at who they are, they have very similar interests, and they're basically supporting the warlord bankers and brokers who own, the stock in the major Fortune 500 companies. They also own the Associated Press. They've owned the central banks. They've owned basically everything where money flows. And so what we're talking about is, in our day, we thought there was free speech because if a Dan Rather reported incorrectly about George Baby Bush, he got kicked off the air if he didn't have the sources together, which he did. And now he's back on the air, and he now is attacking Trump, because that's what he had to do to get a job, to work on mainstream media again. And that shows me that he was a liar the entire time. He, too, was probably told exactly the limitations that they had. I know. I was in the National Security Agency, and I screened the news before it got to the news agencies. And so if I thought that there was a national security issue in a piece of news coming from Europe, I simply, literally, I'm sorry to have to say this, blacked it out, redacted it. And then they couldn't even get it. So the news agencies, unless they had journalists implanted in these places, real journalists telling the truth, and as we now know, they oftentimes fake these people who are supposedly on assignment, where would they get the news to begin with? They're going to get it from Reuters, which is now Reuters Thomson or Thomson Reuters. And that was, of course, owned for a huge amount of time by the Rothschilds, the bankers. And it was their bankers' rag to promote propaganda for their investment plans. And now that's the same thing going on. And the mainstream media is support that. So if you want to say, really, is there free speech anymore? No, it's corporate speech. And when you have these, let's take an example. Fox News. I got to name it. You'd know what it was anyway. Okay, you got 10 stations against Trump, and then you got Fox News that acts like they're for Trump. Look closely, folks. They're not for Trump either.
No, all they do is run liberal clips, video clips all the time. Same thing with Breitbart. If you look at the headlines, it's all trash.
And look at Breitbart. Right next to an article they write about Trump, great article, right next to it is an article trashing him on the same exact topic. So what are you, as a person seeking truth, supposed to do? You were told that Fox News was a safe haven. No. It's a spin zone, just as Betsy just said. Not only a spin zone, it's a disinformation agency. Because look at what happened with Bill. Look at what happened with the blonde-haired lady, Megyn Kelly, Megyn, whatever her name was. When you turned against Trump and you started to simply go towards the complete false narrative, the garbage speech of fake news, then even that one safe haven is a spin zone. Same thing with Breitbart, same thing with Drudge. And those are the ones that they keep targeting and saying, oh, they're really, really bad. We should take them down. They're as bad as anybody else.
They're one of theirs.
So what do you? It was owned by the Mercers. It still is owned by Mercers.
Get into the Mercers.
Well, before we get off Fox News, the same month that Glenn Beck was kicked off of Fox News, James W. Breyer, the director of Facebook, came on the board. He had left the board of Walmart and came on the board of Fox News. That's just a factoid.
Okay.
Wow.
Why do you say wow to that?
Because if you're on the board of Walmart, you're basically a conspirator who's not an American who allowed China to take over our entire economy. And if it wasn't for Trump, right now we would be China.
We have James W. Breyer on video at a conference, I believe it was in Germany, encouraging all of the venture capitalists and entrepreneurs to focus on China. And he actually made the statement, I'm super bullish on China. And of course, that's where his father had gone and was one of the originators of the current venture capital market in China. So
then would there be influence that he could have pushed out to Fox News to make us all feel really warm and fuzzy about China all these years?
Of course.
Of course. I know you go, oh, of course, but that's what people don't get out here.
Yeah, most people don't know.
That the media is being used by these corporate folks to push their propaganda, literally, and that's why we say, turn it off.
Let's talk about the topics, because this is what really helped me get focused on what it is we're looking at.
Okay.
So let's say there are, let's say that the people who are running the banking interests for these media outlets have a set of 20 things that they think are the high priority subject issues that they need to focus on in order to control the narrative. What they do is they put those 20, I'm just visualizing, they put those 20 up on a storyboard. And then they make a couple of columns and they say, okay, they sort those cards into topics never to be discussed, topics to be discussed occasionally, topics to always focus on, and topics that will confuse people. They take those 20 cards and they put them under the appropriate column, okay? So then you have this new sorted version. In my mind, that's what they've done. And so when you talk about limited hangout, so what they do then is they say these 3 right columns, we'll let the news readers read about these pieces of news all day long. These 3 will never be read. And we'll set that up as policy with all those that we control, that those will be verboten topics. And by doing that, they know then that no one will ever be able to sort out that information and actually make sense of it as a result, because they're only getting half of it.
And plus, you're a working adult. You don't have that much time.
You don't have the time, exactly.
I know I brought up the Mercers, but you were laying out some very interesting information about them last night.
Well,
go ahead.
They're British, and of course the name Mercer is literally means merchant, and that was the Mercer. The Mercers were basically the people who had the monopolies working for the Queen, and she would grant them as charters or whatever. So this is the same family. They are literally the Mercers, and they the old man owned it, and then he gave it to his daughter at the time that Steve Bannon. Well, remember, wasn't Steve at Drudge, and then he moved over to Breitbart when Andrew Breitbart died, and then he drove the thing, and it was really extremely right-wing, okay, for quite a while, and they didn't bash conservatives, and they didn't even allow those articles on. And then what happened? Bannon got put onto the Trump campaign. Then what happened? Bannon went nuts. And what did Bannon do? Bannon believed Kissinger, and he sold out America for China. Because what did Bannon really want? To destroy federalism. He wanted to destroy centralized federal government in America, completely annihilate it. I mean, literally and aggressively. And then what happened? When he got fired because he was a bimbo, he wouldn't even wear a decent outfit. He wouldn't take a shower. He wouldn't shave his face. And when he went to the White House, and he believed that his little whiteboard that he had the whole plan written on, which by the way, his secret plan on how to destroy the federal government, he let the cameras take pictures of it, and it was on the news, and so we know his plan.
What was that got to do with the Mercers?
He was the Mercers. He was Daddy Mercer's best buddy. That's why the money stayed. And then when he went to the White House, Daddy Mercer was very happy about that. When he got fired, Daddy Mercer dumped the company, gave it to his daughter. His daughter has basically turned left wing. And what did Bannon do? He believed Kissinger. He went to China. Remember? Bannon was in China for a long time. Bannon believed that he believed Kissinger, that China was going to be the new world power, and that we would just be the nations in the clash of nations, and that the dominant power was going to be China. Wrong. So Bannon bet everything on China, and he lost. And so what you see there is Breitbart now is a complete garbage rag. You can't trust a single thing on Breitbart. Look who wrote the article. Even their own writers. One day write for Trump and the next day write against Trump.
Or they start their articles out like, if this is to be believed, if this is actually happening and truthful. I mean, you always look for these phrases. Also look for sources that are not real sources, anonymous sources, or sources from the White House say. Really? How do you know that? Like right now I'm reading this, that Michael Cohen's going to be doing such and such when he goes to the hearings. How do they know that? What is your source? And you know what? Stop believing the things that you want to believe. I mean, so many people so want this the military tribunals and everyone to be rounded up. Folks, it took us 100 years to get to the place we are today. The unraveling might not be as fast as you think it will be, but I'll tell you what, if we really want this to unravel faster than it's going, we need all hands on deck. We need all of you out there to educate and enlighten the circle of influence you have, to teach people how to discern fake news from truth, to know when they're in a limited hangout, in a spin zone, and what is controlled opposition. We want everyone to come to truth faster so that we can bring world peace seriously to the whole world. Michael, final words on this?
Yeah, the selection of topics is really the key to listening to what we're hearing. And I think that if we look at these organizations and we see them steering away from certain topics over and over and over again, then those are obviously limited hangouts. Because it's not natural that a human being wouldn't want to explore an avenue of a topic just because somebody told them that was off the list. And so we've got to see what's on these storyboard lists that are topics that we're not supposed to hear about, and then those are the ones that alternative media needs to focus on.
If I may, Betsy, I want to underscore something you always say. Look for the content. Don't look for entertainment. If it's entertaining you, ignore it. Only look for indictable evidence. Only look for true content that is substantiated and tells you where its source is. Otherwise, you are basically falling prey to, in some cases, people who are paid by the senior executive service members to go out and create what are caricatures. They're cartoons. These are sites where the tail wags the dog. Read to the end of the Breitbart article. It'll say the opposite of what 9/10 of the article above it says. This is what you have to become a complete warrior of truth for. You cannot be weak and think that you can see through falsehood politics. Absolutely not. You have to be penetrating. You cannot, as Betsy say, dwell on basically pornographic hope that the speculations of people are true. Don't believe any speculation. We started off by seeing that the sensationalism involved, even in alternative media, was in some cases grotesque. And so one of the third or fourth articles that the Anonymous Patriots wrote was to make fun of one of the biggest sites in alternative media, one of the very biggest, and they would post every day. And they kept track of who was number one, how many people were reading it, how many reads there have been, and so on and so forth. And it was a site for garbage speech. It was a site for sensationalistic entertainment that could not be substantiated, that made superficial, hopeful claims that things were going to happen in the future, never did, and they never retracted anything they ever said. In other words, they simply lied, and they tried to keep your hope alive by giving you the topics that they know that you like. So I turned to Betsy one day and said, well, I can write a number one article that'll be up there longer than even the worst sensationalist who posts on this site who would get the most hits.
And I said, you can write it, but you won't know how to post it. I know the secret sauce to posting.
Betsy and her team know all that. I don't even know how to work the internet.
Right.
Michael invented the internet. Betsy manipulates it, and I don't know how to use it.
I did not invent the internet.
I'm just saying.
Well, you did more than Al Gore did.
Yeah, social media. And I don't know how to work anything except a few things. So the point is it's content, folks. And so what we did is I literally said to her, look, I can write an article in a very few minutes that will get number one and be up there the longest. And she said, well, how are you going to do that? I said, watch this. And I said, let's go back and take the articles that got the biggest hits and take their topics, which they don't even address. And we put it all into one headline. And then we actually addressed the topic. Bingo! Number one, stayed up there for like 4 days. Nobody was ever up there for 4 days and got that many hits.
And then we were so addicted.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. We knew how to write. We knew how to post. And that's the thing. We have a history, so you can go back and look and see where we were wrong and where we were right.
So getting hits doesn't mean jack. It may mean that you're a disinformation site, that you are a spin site, that you are a limited hangout. You could be paid by the SES. So, folks, look at it hard. take our rules for perception management, apply it to any article, and you should be able to determine whether it's true or not, just simply by the content of the article.
And then if you look below, in the narration notes, you're going to see a link that'll take you to this video, as well as the second video that's going to walk through a case study of a limited hangout.